Well, good afternoon. Um, Thank you, everyone, for being here. Especially thank my committee and those of you in the audience and other legislative members. I appreciate the attendance here. And so I'll open up this meeting, and I'm going to ask Representative Wes Cantrell if he'd open us up with a prayer. Wait a minute. Hold on, Sarah.
Yep.
Is that you? Okay.
Let's pray together. Father, we're grateful for an opportunity to be together this afternoon, and we ask you to give us wisdom during our time together today. I pray that you'd give us the courage to make the best choices for Georgians and to do what's right for our citizens and help us to know exactly what that is. And we trust you to do that. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. Well, we'll start. We've got some good information, I hope, coming to the committee's attention this afternoon. First on our agenda is Jim Portman. Is he here? Come on up to the with ERS. Thank you for being here. Committee eagerly awaits your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I understand it, I was asked to provide just a brief update on kind of where we are with ERS right now. Is that your expectation? I was asked to provide just a brief financial update for the ERS system. That's what your expectation? Okay.
Yes.
So I'm Jim Potvin. I'm the Executive Director of the Employees Retirement System. As you may be aware, we're responsible for the administration not only of the flagship employees retirement system, but also a number of smaller defined benefit plans, including ones for the legislators, the judicial retirement system, and the public school, the non-teaching employees retirement system. We're also responsible for the Peach State Reserve's 401k and 457 plans for the state. And that's very important to us because that is a key portion of the current tier of the ERS, what we call GSEPs, which is partly a defined benefit plan and partly a 401k plan with a matching employer contribution. We're also responsible for a couple of life insurance plans which are closed to new employees at this time, as well as we're the state's Social Security administrator. The ERS plan has been in slow recovery mode from the so-called Great Recession for the past several years. Our funding status currently stands at 75.3. That is up from a low of 71.4% a few years ago. We are on a track right now to realize a 100% funding ratio in the early 2030s time period. To give you a little bit of background there, in 2013, the board set a funding policy which made a number of changes to some of our actuarial assumptions designed to put us in a more conservative actuarial posture. So, for example, we tightened up our amortization period from 30 years to 25 years for any unfunded liabilities. So we'll be a little bit more aggressive in paying those back. We have been slowly reducing the assumed investment rate of return from what was 7.5% per year for a long time. It's currently 7.3, and we have a scheme in place that will ultimately result in a 7.0% rate of return for the long term going forward. So all of these things are meant to put us in maybe a little bit better position to weather the ups and downs of the investment markets as we move forward throughout the years. So 75.3% funding ratio for ERS. The other systems have a range. So the public school system is about 84% funded. The legislative and judicial retirement systems are both over 100% funded, so they're in very good shape. And the Georgia Military Pension Fund is at 54% and climbing at this point. One of the things that happened in that 2013 to 2016 time period is that we were forced to raise the employer contribution rate for the contributions that have to go into the system. But once we hit 2016, we were able to hold those contribution rates steady for every year since then and for every year for at least the next 2 years into the future. So one of the stated goals of the funding policy was to find a contribution rate level that was stable so that we would reduce or, to the extent possible, eliminate volatility in the budget requests that the agencies have to make of you each year to fulfill their responsibilities on the employer contributions. The market value of assets in the system for ERS is just shy of $14 billion currently. For all of our systems combined, it's $17.5 billion. Those assets are used to provide retirement benefits for approximately 53,000 ERS retirees and 73,000 total retirees across all of our plans. We also have about 59,000 active members in the ERS system and about 110,000 total active members across all of our defined benefit systems. So we definitely touch a large portion of the state. We're not on the same scale as TRS, but we do impact a lot of lives in that respect. We pay out about $1.4 billion per year to our ERS retirees and a little over $1.5 billion overall to all of our retirees. The average ERS monthly pension benefit is about $2,220 per month, so call it $26,600 per year. That has been slowly declining over time, and I expect that to continue as more and more retirees are actually members of the GSEPS program, which provides a smaller defined benefit amount by design. That's the way the program is designed. Of those benefit payments, we have three main sources for the money that comes into the trust fund. Employee contributions make up about 6% of the benefits payments that we make. Employer contributions about 34%, and investments about 60% of our total payments. That is by design. That's why we have the trust fund. We are a relatively mature defined benefit system, and so at this point we would expect to be pretty dependent on investment returns. As far as those returns go, I mentioned before that we have a target right now of 7.3% per year. Last year we achieved 6.9%, which, considering how volatile it was, especially in the October to January timeframe, we were pretty happy with. The two prior years were 12% and 9%. This year, fiscal year to date, so since July 1 through current time, we're a little bit over 9%. So if that holds, we will achieve our mark for this year. As I mentioned, the other half of the GSEPS tier is the 401k plan with the matching contribution. Currently about 63% of our active members are GSEPS members, which means they've been hired since 2009. One of our key goals for that is to make sure that they are paying attention to and taking full advantage of the 401k plan. Obviously, that's a lot different than being in a defined benefit plan, because in a 401k, you have decisions you have to make. You have to more actively manage that in order to get the benefit that you're expecting when you retire. We do default people into a target date fund, which is an investment mix, so that if they don't want to actively manage that, they're still getting sort of the benefits of a varied asset allocation. We also default them in at a 5% contribution rate that incidentally is the same amount that they need in order to receive the full employer match from the state, which is the 3%. Currently, about 75% of our GSEPS members are at or above that 5% contribution rate and receiving the full match. Compare that to 2012, when it was only about 14%. So we've made great progress in that area. Balances in the 401k plan are still pretty small. For that population, it's a less than 10-year-old plan, of course, but they are increasing at the rate of around 20% per year. So hopefully over time we'll see those balances go up as well. So that's it for my prepared remarks. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. I'd like to open the committee. If we've got some questions I'd love to be able to ask if anybody would have some questions. Have you provided this committee with some written, have we got a report from you have you given this committee this year?
I have not.
This committee would like to have a
So
report.
the remarks that I just made are encapsulated in this document. It's just a two-pager that,
Okay.
basically
It'd
provides
be- It'd be good
an
if you could
overall.
get this
If you'd like to see
committee
that,
that information.
would be happy to do so.
Thank you. Well, I see no questions. Thank you for your good work, and a lot of employees depend on it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Buster Evans with Teacher Retirement System.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's an honor to serve our over 400,000 members of the Teachers Retirement System. It's also an honor to be able to present to you the information that I'm going to share with you about our Teachers Retirement System, and also say a special thanks to you. This is the first time of me coming to you in 4 years that our employer contribution rates have not gone up. So it feels a lot better to be able to talk to you in a year when those contribution rates have gone down. And hopefully that's made the budget process a little bit easier here in the legislature this year. I realize it's a little bit of a liability right after lunch talking about things such as pension systems. Some people think they're boring, but the reality of it is that a lot of people rely on them, and we think it's a significant and important part of educational policy in the state of Georgia. Most of everything that I'll share with you this afternoon is just on a single page, and I certainly have this in a more lengthy document if you would like it, but let me share with you an overview, then see if you have any specific questions. First of all, as a reminder, we do serve primarily K-12 education as our largest single group. Our next largest group is our Board of Regents University System, our Technical College System of Georgia, county extension agents, public library systems, and then other people who may be employed in state agencies that were previously vested in the Teachers Retirement System. As of just a couple of days ago, some interesting numbers that I think will be somewhat impressive to you in some ways. We have over $84 billion in assets. When you add what ERS has and you add what TRS has, that's over $100 billion in state retirement fund assets that are being managed by our investment professionals at the Teachers Retirement System. Our fund is ranked the 25th largest retirement fund in the nation with 240,000 active contributing members, 133,000 retired members, and then a number of inactive members. I will stop and say a couple things about those membership numbers. They've been growing, and that's really a good thing. We went through the recession where we actually lost membership. That meant we had fewer people contributing into the system. But we, as school systems and colleges have been able to return to hiring new people to come into the profession, we've seen those membership numbers increase. So all total, we have over 450,000 retired, active, as well as inactive members of the Teachers Retirement System. 3.5 years ago, I came to the retirement system, and our asset, we had $65 billion in assets. As of this morning, we had $84.6 billion in assets. So that's over $19 billion worth of growth in 3.5 years. During that same period of time, we've also paid out about $14 billion in assets. So as I navigate through this slide and share with you how our fund balance has grown, it's also important to know that we've paid out a significant amount of benefits to our membership as well. As you look at our current funding ratio, as of June 30th, 2019, we were 77.4. Most of the numbers that I will share with you in terms of fund health are going to be very similar to the information that Mr. Popman shared with you. And again, we have been, that funding balance ratio has been increasing as we continue to recover from the recession. Our primary revenue streams come from basically three different sources. Our employee contribution rate is set by Georgia law at between 5% and 6%. We are currently at 6%, and by law cannot go higher than that. Our employer contribution rate in fiscal year 2020, as you know, we reached the highest level that we have been at 21.14%. We are delighted that for FY 2021, the budget you're currently working on, that employer contribution rate is down to 19.06%. While we can't always say it's going to stay at that level, we do feel like that we have greater or less volatility in those numbers than what we saw over the past several years. The third area of our revenue streams, and the largest area of our revenue streams, comes from our investment earnings. People always want to know how the fund is doing. People always want to know about sustainability. People always want to know about, can you get the kind of returns that you're assuming that you're going to get for actuarial help? We have recently reduced our assumed rate of return from 7.5% down to 7.25%. So this budget, again, is basing the assumption rate at 7.25%. We've been very fortunate for the last 4 years to experience asset growth as a result of the returns that we've got, with FY17 being over 12.5% and then 8.94% for 2018. A little bit of a dip in fiscal year 2019 down to 6.79. But year to date, as of today, we're actually over 9.5% year to date. Now, I know it would be perhaps less than optimistic to say it would be nice to be able to close the books right now for the year, but if we can at least hold on to that for the balance of the year, we think as these numbers are built into our actuarial valuations, we again will see sustainability being a more realistic goal for us, and at less of a burden on not only the state government, but also by the cost of our local employers who also have a part of the information or part of the responsibility for continuing to put revenues in the system. On the far right-hand side, I would just remind you that every year we do see a large number of pieces of legislation. I certainly won't go over all of those, but there are a couple of those that perhaps you might have even had a call or two about, or an email. I understand some of you get those kind of communications, but House Bill 109, which has been significantly changed since it was originally introduced, is still out there and still active, and I assume will be coming before committee. If you have any questions about that, certainly we'll be glad to share with you anything that we've been doing as a part of that. Also, House Bill 336 is a return to work bill, which continues to be alive, and many of our local employers are interested in seeing something like that move through successfully. And we've been able to work with the authors of that bill to ensure that it would not have any actuarial cost to the teachers' retirement system of Georgia. Finally, the last thing I'd refer you to is our economic impact brochure. We've done one of these previously. We've just recently updated it, so you can look on the back panel of that and look at your own county and see, I think, 3 significant numbers. First of all, how many people you've got there who are retired, how many people are active, and then how much money is going back in the area of benefits to those people who reside in the counties and are being able to be spent in the local businesses in your local community. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my comments, but I'll be glad to attempt to answer any questions that you or committee members may have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. I've got a question. Let's go back and sort of, we got some time to this afternoon, talk about HB 336 about retired teachers. You've got a good bit of history in education, and could you just sort of delve into that a little deeper, pros and cons, or why we're going there right now, if you would, just for a committee?
Sure, certainly. Current provision in law says a retired educator can go back to work and continue to draw their pension as long as they're working 49% or less. They also can go back and be a substitute teacher 100% of the time. And they do so we have about 12,500 of our retirees, or roughly 10% of our retiree base, who comes back to work either in a school system where they retired from or in a neighboring district. Over the years, we've had legislation like this, particularly so that, let's say, an employer had a difficult-to-fill position. I'll use the example of mathematics. House Bill 336 would allow STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, as well as other critical need areas, to have a retiree come back to work 100%. So as an administrator, if I'm looking for someone to fill that math classroom, oftentimes my best person, if I've got a need, might be a retiree, might be the only choice that I have. So if I'm a student, I need a good math teacher. If I'm a principal, I need a good math teacher. If I'm a parent, it would certainly benefit me. I would be delighted for my child. I don't care where they come from as long as my child has one. But the provision in state law is restricted to people coming back 49% or less right now. Otherwise, people would have a tendency to retire immediately at 30 years and then come back to work and draw that retirement benefit and come back to work. And that would incentivize early retirement, which would have a cost to the retirement system because we would be paying out a retirement benefit over a longer period of time. Now, it'd be a good deal if you could get it, but it does come at a cost. This particular piece of legislation would allow them to come back full-time, but they would basically have to sit out for a year. So that sitting out for a year, our actuaries say, would disincentivize an early retirement, and certainly there would be no guarantee that if I were operating a school or a school district that I would bring that person back. But if I did need someone to come back in that critical needs area, this would be a tool that I could use as an educational administrator to ensure that I've got a quality teacher coming back into the classroom. And hopefully I've given you a sufficient enough overview of that, but that's where we're at.
Okay, thank you. Very good explanation, and you might have some follow-up question. Representative Cantrell.
Thank you. That was a good explanation, but I need you to slow it down for those of us who are a little slower. Let me make sure I understood it correctly. Currently, you can retire and teach immediately at 49%.
After a 30-day break in service, yes, sir.
In this bill, and I'm talking just in big picture, not all the weeds, this bill would allow, you'd have to sit out a year and you could come back at 100%.
Exactly.
Okay. Just want to make sure I understood that. Mr. Chairman, another one.
Go ahead.
109, do you care to kind of talk about that a little bit in its current form?
Well, under its current form, would cap, currently retirees, when a person gets ready to retire, they can use any forfeited or unused sick leave for service credit time. This particular bill, in the area of sick leave, would cap it at 1 year. So in other words, I could not be used over 1 year. As it is right now, if you had 2, perhaps even 3 years of service, you could count that. So that would be the element of that. The other portion of that deals with what many people refer to as a COLA. Technically, it's referred to as a post-retirement benefit adjustment. Currently, the Board of Trustees is authorized by state law to pay a retirement benefit, a cost of living adjustment. They do it 2 times a year, have done it many, many years at 1.5% 2 times a year. This particular bill, House Bill 109, would require that they pay that no more than 1 time a year at a maximum of 3%.
And that sick leave portion, does that apply to current teachers or just new teachers?
As I understand, this would apply to all current retirees, people who are currently teaching, as well as new, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
And to tell you a little bit of where that came from, a couple of years ago, the Senate and Appropriations Committee had requested a special examination of things that would save the retirement system some resources, and changing that COLA policy was one of the things that particular provision would actually save us about $17 million a year.
Okay, Representative Jones. Yeah, you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you for your service to the TRS, and most importantly, thank you for your service to Forsyth County as superintendent. One really quick question, because you don't realize I'm brainstorming ideas to basically get our high-demand teachers, get rural access to our high-demand areas in STEAM especially. And your comments about 336 give me pause for a moment, and let me explain what I mean by that. In last year's computer ed bill, we basically gave the provision that effectively school systems can share computer ed teachers, computer technology teachers, in order to basically ensure that all 181 school districts had access to that type of teaching capability. If one of the things that we have been at least discussing is the idea of expanding that. So then that way, if we do have certain school systems that just can't bring in calculus teachers, physics teachers, et cetera, if we can bring them in certain other areas, let's go ahead and bring them in, and then we can, quote, loan them through either virtual learning, hybrid, et cetera. Do you think doing that would have a negative downstream implication around this retirement issue in terms of encouraging, I'll say, a quicker retirement and then having them double dipping into both retirement funds and into current funds, or do you think that would not have an impact?
Actuary says with the year wait that it would not be able to do that, but this would give you, if that certification area fit within what this law would be interpreted, it would perhaps expand your ability to bring people like that to serve in that area where you may not currently have a large number of teachers by which to choose from.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now I am. Thank you. I had a question on the earlier legislation that would allow teachers to retire early and go back after 1 year. So currently, they have to wait 30 days to go back for part-time.
That is correct.
So the change is really 11 months difference. The policy change would make it 11 months. And you know, I do look with great skepticism on some of these actuarial studies because they're really just a hypothetical, what do you think would happen? Because we're talking about behavior, not just numbers. The concern I have is that, well, let me just ask a couple questions. What is the average retirement check to a teacher yearly?
Okay, I can answer that two different ways. The average benefit is about $3,500 per month. The average new retiree is $2,500 per month.
So 3,500 times 12, I don't know, over 40,000 a year, right?
Yes.
So if this incentivized a teacher to retire 5 years early at $40,000 a year, that would mean $200,000 in earnings over that 5 year of retirement, but yet after 1 year, they'd be making a full-time salary. If I were a teacher, I'd figure out a way to bridge that 11 months, and over 5 years of retiring early, I've made a lot more money with this deal. That's my concern, is that it would put a far greater burden on what we already know is oftentimes underfunded, our retirement system. And there's talk of expanding it beyond just STEAM, so it may be across the board, not just STEAM. And we also know that we don't have a shortage of STEM teachers in many areas of the state, particularly the greater metropolitan area. During the Great Recession, for those of us who were here, there were no teacher pay raises. And we saw teachers and superintendents at all levels, if their finances allowed, it was, I mean, by going ahead and retiring June 30th, you got the COLA on July 1 that you weren't going to get if you were a teacher. You weren't going to get a pay increase. We also found that young teachers couldn't get jobs because we'd made class sizes larger. I mean, today we may have a shortage. We don't know 5 years from now. We may have an overabundance if we hit another downturn in the economy and we have to make cuts to education, increase the class sizes. So it just seems like the math would work under today's circumstances, that a teacher would be far better off taking 11 months of a vacation and coming back and making 140% of their salary for that additional 5 years. And so that's my concern, is the burden on the retirement system that we already know. I mean, the taxpayers generally have to come to the table to make it whole, and it's still not fully funded. I'm curious about your response to that. Am I missing something?
No, I certainly think your observation of that is an adequate way to examine what is an area that we've not been in since 2012 when the law was previously repealed and for purposes that you alluded to. One thing that this bill does have within it is a 5-year sunset, which hopefully would address part of that issue. We've looked at our historical return to work numbers. We've seen little increases when there was that opportunity, and we've seen little decreases when it went away. It was, I guess a person's interpretation as to what is statistically significant may vary, but our observations were they were slight increases, but they were not perhaps as much as some people would guess. There's some people who, as an administrator, once they retire, and if we can get them out the door, we're actually not interested in them coming back. And if that happens to be an incentive for that to happen, that may be a benefit. But the liability is there. If a person, again, within the context of this law, the employer and employee contribution would be being made for that person. So that's part of the aspect that purely from a retirement system, it keeps us whole, but it may certainly be an incentive for a person to work and make 140, 150, 160% of what they would have otherwise made if they had continued to work before retiring.
Pardon me for not knowing, in the legislation, if they come back, will they be making the contribution to the retirement system as a retiree, as would the employer?
The law says the employer will make that employer and employee contribution rate. Under the previous law, one of the things that we saw some districts do was negotiate a salary, which would have reduced that amount by some level, and even gave them the flexibility of do some things, maybe to work more than 49%, but less than 100% by not taking on extracurricular activity or duties, maybe just teaching 4 of 6 classes or something of that fit the needs of that particular school or school district so that they could get the teacher to fill in that responsibility.
One final, I guess because many of our teachers retire before the age of Social Security, right?
That is correct.
So one reason teachers stay on is because their retirement is not sufficient without that extra amount that they will earn when they're 62 or older through Social Security. This would bridge that difference and allow them to make, to go ahead and retire early, frankly, make more than they would have made. I'm open to the idea of, if we have great, I hate the idea of great teachers, not of retiring and not coming back if we need them and they want to teach. It just seems like maybe there's got to be a better way where we're not pulling on our retirement or risking that. It's sort of an unintended consequence.
Sure.
But anyway, thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Madam Pro Tem. Great questions. Mr. Evans, I've got a question. I've got your annual report, and it's a little bit hard for me to read, but I'm just want to talk about your rate of return on your investment portfolio. The way I read it, on your equities, are you satisfied with what return we've been getting over the last 5-6 years? It doesn't seem to be keeping up with what the broader market's been doing. And I know we're in a long term. I don't like to focus on, short windows, but you've got a team and investing this money. Are y'all very satisfied with the returns we're getting as compared to the market?
Mr. Chairman, let me do my best that I can. I think you know me well enough to know I'm never satisfied. I always want it to be better, and I always think it can be better. One of the things that in looking at our returns that we have to keep into consideration is that we're roughly 35% fixed or bond instruments, and then roughly 65% equities. So we will
talk a second about why that is? Is it self-imposed, or is it other things to do that?
Well, in the creation of the retirement system, your predecessors recognized that there is greater stability in that fixed instrument bond market. So, but there's greater returns most likely in that equity market. But you would not want a time where you saw great losses in the equity market without there being a sufficient amount of base money. And then oftentimes markets work countercyclical to each other, where if you're losing assets in the equities market, you actually may be gaining value in your fixed, whether they be corporate bonds and or other types of fixed instruments. So that's the rationale. It's a good rationale. Now, over on the Senate side, that I did not refer to this since it's coming over there, Senate Bill 294 would allow, if this were to pass through the Senate and the House, the teachers' retirement system to invest up to 5% of its assets into alternative investments. We think that may not be a bad thing, because we do recognize that there historically have been greater returns in the alternative investment pool. Mr. Potman can attest that they do that in ERS, and over the last 6 years they've got greater returns in the alternative investments than they do than the S&P 500 and our broader overall fund has been able to generate. So going back to your question, there's good rationale and reason that we have two different asset classes, and that it's set in law that there's a certain amount that can go in each, but we certainly think that there might be room for another asset class within our portfolio.
Okay, so is it self-imposed to 70-30 or thereabouts? I mean, what kind of range? I know a lot of investment foundations and all have changed their ratios a little more heavily to the equities than the fixed assets, and just want to know if y'all consider that. I guess that's something you look at every year.
Well, in that it's set in legislation, we certainly would look to administer our plan in accordance to what you codify. Frankly, have been, if you look long term at what our returns have been, we've been able to meet or exceed that 7.25% rate of return. Actually, the life of the plan is more like 7.5%, 7.4%. So we think that is a reasonable return, but in that we have recently reduced that assumed rate of return. We know that is a more conservative approach. We think that it may be in our best sustainability interest to, at some point in time, further slightly reduce that if our returns suggest that ought to be done. But one of the things that happens when we lower that rate of return, that's going to increase that employer contribution rate. And at a time when it would be difficult for the state to do that, it would be, we work together to try to balance what our current assumptions are, what our current realities are, as well as what we feel like can be afforded by our employers.
I was just looking here on page 51, your rates of return on equities. You got a 1, 3, 5, 10, and 20-year return, and all of those are below what the returns of S&P is for those 5 incomes. I was just curious, y'all working to improve that.
Yeah. I will tell you, our investment team ranks not only in terms of returns among the best in the nation, but their fees for administrating. And 80% of our funds are managed in-house. So our investment expenses are minimal and among the best in the nation. And if you'd like additional information about that at some time, I think it would be worthwhile to look at as well.
Okay. Thank you. I see a couple more questions. Representative Stovall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to know what effect will the teachers' raises have on the retirement contribution that the school districts have to make?
Very outstanding question, and there's actually 2 answers to that question. First and foremost, there'll be a larger amount of money coming in as a result of that teacher pay raise. So greater amount of employer and employee contributions. Now, One of the things that does that hurts us a little bit is that increases what we refer to as our UAL, unfunded accrued liability, that we have to book on our books so that we will eventually pay a larger retirement benefit. But one of the, I think this was probably an unintended consequence that we've seen, we actually saw fewer retirements this past year than we did the previous year. We think that is due to the promise of pay raises that is keeping people in the classroom, which is going to mean for us, for those people who do stay several years longer, a shorter amount of time that we will pay out benefits, even though they'll be larger. But from an educational policy perspective, that's helping keep people in the profession at a time where some people think in some areas of the state there are teacher shortages, so it's actually helping that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Jones, Todd Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick, as a follow-up to the chairman's question, as those of us who don't have $100 billion, basically, that we're managing, we look at the S&P, as the chairman said, we look at, different, I'll say, indexes as benchmarks. When you're sitting down with your team, is it CalSTRS? Is it the Harvard Endowment? What is it that you guys see as maybe a benchmark of similar size or a similar type mission that you're saying to yourself, you know what, I'm beating, I'm equal to, or I'm less than? I know you have an internal 7.3, but is there anyone that you're looking outside of and saying we want to benchmark against them because they're best practice?
We work with a group of Mercer consultants who basically establish what those benchmarks are based on the asset mix. And so that's where those particular benchmarks are set. And that does include a comparison to the S&P 500 as well as the fixed instruments for comparison purposes.
One more question.
Yeah, sure.
Dr. Evans, is Mercer, and I'm familiar with Mercer, is Mercer bringing into you also, I'll say, and again, I'm not just picking on CalSTRS, pick on any, state teachers retirement fund. Are you guys also looking at, I'll say, similar, and CalSTRS is much larger, but are you looking at similar size pension funds and saying, hey, what are they doing? If they're doing a little bit better, we're looking at best practices there. Is Mercer providing to you some of the best practices of those pension funds? Are those pensions that are kind of achieving maybe 50 extra basis points, 60 extra basis points?
Representative Jones, most of that conversation excludes the executive director of the retirement system, but I think the way that you've asked the question, I can answer it. Yes, basically looking at similar types of funds, similar types of asset mixes, in that Mercer is a national firm, at least, in terms of working with funds all across the country.
Thank you, Dr. Evans.
Chairman Silcox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming today. I appreciate this information. Was curious if, in a similar vein, are the fees that y'all are paying for your consultants in terms of investing these monies competitive?
We have some of the lowest cost in terms of investment fees in the nation. I am familiar with two different reports that have ranked the teachers' retirement system among the lowest fees in the nation, and I see that to be true. One of the reasons is because 80% of our funds are invested internally. Only 20% are managed by 10 different external firms. That it works very well, sort of a reciprocal relationship in that we learn from them, they learn from us, but it's a smaller part of our portfolio, therefore it doesn't cost us nearly what it would otherwise to manage our fees. See, our overall budget for all of TRS is about $40 million. And if you were looking at simply a half a percentage of $80 billion, you'd be looking at over $400 million.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. See one more question. Representative Stovall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, again. I have a follow-up question to the one I asked about the pay raise. Will that also, how would that affect the retirement of those teachers when they're at the highest pay year?
Okay, they will have to work an additional 3 years. In other words, a teacher, when they retire, they're paid on their highest average 2 years. And but they consider the first year to be a base, so they actually would have to work 3 full years to get the full benefit to maximize that retirement.
Mr. Evans, could you go a little deeper and explain to my committee a little bit the ramifications of when you change the assumed rate of return from 7.5 to 7.25. Could you talk to that a little bit further for my committee?
Yes, previously, the Teachers Retirement System of Georgia used an actuarial process called smooth valuation interest rate. And basically what that meant is it had a variable rate. We were set at 7.5%, but that rate technically could be as high as 8 or low as 7. So we found it as an opportunity to lock it in at 7.25% as that rate was going up during that smoothing process. In locking it in, that was enabled us to reduce that employer contribution rate to the level that you've seen that. 7.25% is now the national median in terms of plans across the country. There are some that are as high as 8%. There are some who are, I'm familiar with, as low as 6%. Again, the lower the assumed rate of return, the more conservative you are. But at the same time, the lower that rate is, the larger that employer contribution rate would be. So we'll be looking for opportunities in the future to, first of all, to ensure that we're actually have a rate that matches what our returns are, but also recognizing that if we have an opportunity to move to a more conservative rate, that does enhance our long-term sustainability as a fund.
Thank you. What I wanted. Are there any other questions from the committee? Hearing none, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for the big job you do, $84 billion investment. Take care of it. Thank you. I'm going to open up the floor. I did not have a sign-up sheet, but I know some people have asked to come talk on the 21 budget, and we would be happy at this time to hear from anyone in the audience who would like to speak. I know Gay Smith, Family Connection, if she's here, would like to come. Please come to the podium if you would, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you so much for giving us a few minutes to speak with you. We've provided you a packet, a pretty comprehensive packet that we hope will answer some of your detailed questions. But I am here on behalf of the Georgia Family Connection Partnership and the network of 159 local community collaboratives. The reduction to Georgia Family Connection state funding, including the $260,000 reduction in lottery funds, cut into muscle and bone. They will reduce our ability to directly support counties, aid our partners in reaching communities, provide essential data on the conditions of children and families, as well as measure the impact of community efforts, which is our core work. Our existing infrastructure and capacity has allowed us to quickly embed priority work at the community level. If that capacity is diminished, state priority will decelerate and future opportunities will be lost for Georgia. Examples are some of the work that we do in early learning and health with our partners at DeKalb, as well as our work in Quality Rated and the Get Georgia Reading campaign. I've asked Ariane Weldon, who is the Get Georgia Reading campaign executive director, to address some of those impacts directly.
Georgia Family Connection Partnership serves as the lead agency for the Get Georgia Reading campaign, providing critical infrastructure and staff and access to our statewide network of local collaboratives. The campaign has made great strides in just a short amount of time. Georgia has 110 campaign communities implementing local grade level reading strategies in 103 counties, by far the most in the nation. Grade level reading has improved by reading proficiency has improved by 1% each year of the campaign, taking Georgia from just having 37% of our third graders reading proficiently by the end of third grade to 42%. And the campaign has influenced the dramatic expansion of school climate as a focus across the state, impacting the expansion of PBIS not only in K-12, but also in early learning settings. And we also serve as the lead partner, supportive partner for Quality Rated. And because of our existing infrastructure capacity and 159 county reach, Georgia Family Connection Partnership serves as the private sector partner to decal in executing the quality rated initiative. For example, we've managed over $15 million in private funding in support of decal's statewide quality rated initiative since April 2012. We'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I do have a couple of questions for you. Representative Stovall.
Actually, it's me this time. We're sharing the mic. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm a big supporter of the Get Georgia Reading campaign, and I would just like to make a personal testimony as to the power of what they do. Last Saturday in LaGrange, we had well over 100 people, maybe 150 people spend their Saturday with REN and people talking about the Get Georgia Reading program. Now, our county does have some deficits in that reading area to getting our students reading by third grade, and I think these should be looked at not as expenditures but as investments. We focused a lot over the last several years on the having our students reading on grade level by third grade, and of all the programs I've seen, I think Get Georgia Reading is the most efficient and the most effective program to aid us with that. So I would say that anything we can do to fund those programs will pay huge benefits later on. So I'm just kind of echoing what she said as someone who just I spent my Saturday with them last Saturday as well. And when you can bring that many people in, we had all of the local organizations from Boys and Girls Club on up and down who came to see what they have to say and to collaborate to see that we can get our students reading. So I'm a big supporter, and I hope we'll do everything we can to support those programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Stovall, have you got a question? Okay. Yeah, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I really appreciate all the work that the Get Georgia Reading program is doing. It's not much of a question, but just a comment. I served on the Georgia Literacy Commission a couple of years ago when it was actually getting kicked off. And one of the concerns because of the Literacy Commission was the number of Georgians that were not adults that are not going to be able to be employed because of their literacy level. And I agree with Chairman Nix that if we can start early with our early kids and making sure they're on track, then we won't have such a deficit like we're having. I think it was almost 800-something thousand people that was in 2018 that would not be eligible for some of the technical jobs and others that require efficiency in reading. And then when you look at the amount of kids that are not on level by third grade, all of that still stems back from early education. So I chime in with Chairman Nix in making sure that any program that's supporting early literacy, that we support it and not look at it as an expense, but as an investment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Speaker Pro Tem Jones. Oh, yeah, no, okay. I've got a question about Get Georgia Reading. I'm fascinated by it too, and really just don't have us hands around. How widespread is that program going and the extent of it in the state?
So we have 110 campaign communities that represents 103 counties across the state.
How many counties?
103.
Okay. So what is the limitation on getting 104 or more?
Oh, I think we're on the momentum to getting more. We have more and growing. Communities adopting third grade reading is a key benchmark across all the sectors and deciding to join the campaign.
Okay.
So I imagine in the next couple of years we'll be just moving right along. It's moved up steadily.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions of the committee for them? Thank you for being here. Appreciate this information and packet. Is there anyone else in the audience? Please come to the podium and introduce yourself, and we'd love to hear from you.
Good afternoon. I'm Angela Palm from the Georgia School Boards Association. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I wanted to speak to the teacher pay raise. I know it's causing a lot of grief. All of you have a really difficult job, and I do not envy you having to try to prioritize the needs versus the wants of everybody coming to you for money in the budget. We do support the teacher pay raise. And our members, sometimes whenever there's a teacher pay raise, they always talk about the local cost because there are some that are involved. The reason we're supporting it is because of the need to increase the workforce. There's a study that came out in December that showed that since 2010, there are a third less candidates going into our colleges of education, not just in Georgia, but across the nation. Of those that go into the colleges of education, there are about a fourth less than prior to that period who are actually completing the program. So we have to be able to attract people into the profession. We also have to attract people from other states to come here to teach because we don't graduate enough teachers in the state itself, and we have not for as long as I've been around. And the other thing that we have to concentrate on is drawing people from other careers. To do any of those things, if you want to draw from other states to move here, if we want to draw from other careers, the first thing people look at is the compensation, which is, of course, more than salary. Some of the other things that you've talked about earlier today. So because of that, I think it's important that we continue to invest in the salary schedule and raising the salary level of the teachers of Georgia. And so for that reason that we support it. And I thank you. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I know salary is very important, but school climate and the atmosphere of where our teachers teach, how does that, is that improving or your feedback from our teachers? Is there some work we can do in that area on a local level?
I'm sorry.
Just kind of school climate. I know one of the areas is compensation, but that's not all.
No.
What retains and attracts teachers to the profession.
No, working conditions is a huge issue also in teaching as well as every other profession, obviously. Some of the things that have come up over the years, class size, which is a local decision on how to set that under the current statutes and the contracts that districts have signed. Behavior, discipline in the schools. Representative Nix has worked on PBIS, as well as some of the others of you, and that is making a big impact from the figures that I've seen from the Department of Education. So yes, there are some other things that we have done over the years that we certainly continue to support. PBIS money flows through the Reeses. And Gary McGimney over at the Department of Education heads up the Department of School Climate and Safety, so that's certainly an area that we would continue to look at.
Thank you for mentioning those. We're working on those as well.
Yes.
All right. Representative.
Afternoon. Thank you for your time. I sure do appreciate it. In concept, I absolutely understand the need for the raise. Do you happen to know by chance what the turnover rate is within the state for teachers, say within their first 5 years?
30%? 40? It's high.
It is high.
It is high.
That was my understanding.
Yes.
Have you guys been able to put together a summary of exit interview, I'll say, drivers behind why we have such a, I'll say, high turnover rate within the first 60 months?
GSBA has not, in previous years, the Professional Standards Commission, the PSC, has done some surveys and has gathered information and issued reports. I'm not sure when the last one was. It's been about 3 years since I've seen one. But they may have done it, I just haven't seen it. So, but they have looked at why teachers leave, if they're leaving their teaching position to move up, or if they're just leaving education in general. And I think most of them are leaving education in general.
Yeah, so it would be, if possible, getting those statistics to the committee, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman? Okay, yeah, if you could get those for us, right there would be great, because being able to match up why we're losing 4 out of 10 against what are going to be, in a sense, that package. And like you said, compensation is more than just salary. I think that's important to look at. Thank you.
Sure.
Representative Stovall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question about with the School Board Association, when you all are doing your training for the school board members, is there what type of training is given as far as being able to give enough support to the superintendent, but also being involved with what's going on in their particular school district? And I guess need to clarify a little bit. So we talked about school climate, we talked about the teacher raises, and kind of focusing a lot on the school climate as far as knowing exactly what's going on the local level in these particular schools, and being able to adjust the policies as needed. So I just kind of want to know, how much do y'all touch on that with the School Board Association when you're training the new school board leaders or doing reinforcement training?
We focus on that a lot in our training, that the board's position, and as is stated in state law, is to adopt policy, and the superintendent's role is to carry it out. It's also in state law that it's the board's role to hold the superintendent accountable for what happens. And so I'm also happen to be the director of policy at GSBA as well as doing the legislation. And so in our training, we teach them that they adopt a policy and get information about what's happening, whatever the topic is around it. And then if they need to adjust it, they adjust it. That it shouldn't just be something that they pass and it sits there, that if they need to revisit it, they revisit it, and certainly throughout the year they should be getting information about various topics. For instance, discipline, if they are concerned about what the discipline looks like, what are the discipline numbers, how many referrals have there been, how many suspensions have there been, and information like that, and how is it changing over time? Is it getting better? What are we doing to address the discipline issue if there's a high number of suspensions, or if, and ask for the disaggregated information regarding that. And so for the topics across the board, that's what we teach them to do.
Okay, I just, like I said, I know with the school climate, that still comes back to policy and what is being allowed to be operated inside the school, in the individual schools and across the school district. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Speaker Pro Tem Jones, question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Palm, for your many years of service. We've worked together for a long time, and your comments, and I appreciate you clarifying that the School Board Association does support the pay raises, because there is always a concern, regardless of what the end result is this session, on the positions that we don't fund at the state, and the burden on school systems, some of whom can afford it better and some who actually cannot. I did just want to mention one point in response to Representative Todd Jones about the leaver rate, the turnover rate. I looked at it a few years ago, and it really has not changed in probably 20 years. It's been right at 40% no matter what happens. It changed a little bit during the Great Recession because there weren't other jobs to be had, and so it went down a little bit. But that said, I think we just have, there are many changes in society today that make people leave, including some move, out of state. There's a bigger transiency rate. People move more than they used to. There are more opportunities for women who teach today to go into other fields to make more money. But despite all of that, it still remains relatively consistent, which tells me we do have a committed workforce of teachers who are relying on us to create as good a climate as we can for them, compensate them well, because they're committed to Georgia's children. But I think it's hard to put your finger on what we could do to increase, or decrease that rate.
Right.
But it shouldn't change what we do here, creating a good climate.
Right, and you've been around a while too. And so the last Education Reform Commission we had, one of the committees was teachers. And one of the things that came up, and it comes up in the national literature too, is that for new teachers, they want more support than they typically get. They want mentors, and how we work out how we do that always ends up being the problem. And a stronger induction program. We also have seen anecdotal reports where new teachers don't feel comfortable in the classroom. They don't feel prepared once they walk in there and it's all theirs to be able to manage the students. I think that's probably particularly true at the high school level when the teacher is 22, 24 years old and she's walking into a class of juniors and seniors. So there may be some things around that. Every time we have a commission, we come up with those possibilities that we talk about, but all of those require some form of funding. If there were a longer working period for student teachers, if there is a strong mentor program that would have to be consistent across the state, or we pick a few districts to try it in. I think that we're going to have to start looking at those kinds of ideas and pick just a few to try it in and see what works and what doesn't work. Because what sounds good and sounds logical that it would help may not. So because I agree with the Speaker Pro Tem that society is different. A spouse may get transferred, they may find a different job, they may just decide that this is not for them. So thank you.
Thank you. I see no more questions. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to address the committee? Welcome. Please come to the mic, and thank you for being here.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I wasn't quite prepared to speak, so I'm just going to kind of wing it. I wasn't sure you were going to take comments, but my name is Christina Kennedy, and I'm the Education Director at Hillside Conant School. Yeah. We are one of your 20 psychiatric residential treatment facilities here in the state of Georgia. And I wanted to talk to you because our residential treatment facilities grant is one of the grants that's looking to be cut by 4% next year, and then 6% the year after that. And I think it's a total of $150 million. And I just want to speak to the fact that that may not seem like a lot in your huge budget, but for us, it's absolutely devastating if that occurs. That would be 40%, actually 41% of my entire operating budget for my school. So whereas it might mean textbooks and things like that that our facilities don't even get because we don't get the local share, that it would be teachers for us. And we're already teaching children that are the most difficult to teach in Georgia and that nobody else will educate, and it falls on us to do that. And having a cut in these grant funds would really be devastating. So I hope that you'll take a close look at that. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Chairman. Silcox, thank you.
I got a hard name. I know
it has been a long day.
I appreciate you coming. And so tell me again exactly where these funds are coming from. This is
the non-QBE formula grant.
Non-QBE formula grant.
Right.
And this is for mental health?
We are a mental health facility, yes. The kids live there, so they're residential facilities, and we have an on-campus school that the children go to school with us while they're in the hospital.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing no more questions, thank you for being here.
I appreciate your time.
Is there anyone else would like to? Representative Buckner? No, you're good. Okay. Good. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you from our committee, and thank you others for being here. Good hearing, and I adjourn the meeting. Thank you.